raindrops from your eyes.
Swollen images of glory in my mind at enlistment. Overhead a flapping red, white, and blue filling the distance. A grand divide between myself and conscientious convictions or belief systems that stop people from killing over religion. I was young and I was out of options in my mind. It was supposed to be fun, my obligations ill-defined. I didn't want to take charge with a gun back in my mind. Without college or riches, no dreams are realized. Well, I never have the ladder the Marines to get me to first. Ain't nothing better than dress blues and the one spitting this verse. To see the world pay into the GI Bill, fat in the purse. My recruiter made it sound simple, a play get well rehearsed. Forever cursed to the ones who get young innocent signatures under the guise of from God and country their honor diminishes. Greed built a standing army when against the founders' wishes. Now free democracy conducts war games and peacekeeping missions. Ironic hypocrisy.
Falling tears, raindrops from your eyes. Falling rain, let it fall.
I scored high in my entrance exams on ASVAB and chose the 0341 with guaranteed Hawaii track. Graduated basic, now MOS school's where I'm at. A mortar man with a 35-pound gun on my back. Plus my rifle 8 pounds, 65-pound pack. I'm 18, weigh a $195 and feel jack. 108 pounds on my back, a boot marine and Cadillacs. A short 20-mile hump, 4 quarts in my flat. After 7 miles, swear I hear my right foot crack. I'm an E1, tell my sergeant I think it snapped. He's an E5, shouts profit, don't beat me crap. You got 2 feet, compensate and don't fall back. After 4 more miles, my left foot joins in the act. Only 9 more to go, I walked through all, that's a fact. 1 certificate for intestinal fortitude, not having shat. And 3 months healing, lost Hawaii to Guantanamo, rap.
Sergeant Davy 12, who I met in 6th grade. Dress greens, patent leather, and a high top fade. My mind was made up, I couldn't wait to grow up so I could sign up, man up, and stop the corrupt. A champion for God and country. Just wait till they get a load of me, an unstoppable PFC. Private first class, polished brass. I wanted to kill all the black pajamas that were hiding in the grass. But with no war in sight, my plight to fight never took flight. So I trained during the day and got drunk at night. Set my sights on all types of glory. Fast forward to Afghanistan, totally different story. IEDs, enemies, no front line to see. 80 pounds of gear in the desert, I could hardly breathe. Blood-stained fatigues, very many colleagues sent home to the VA to live with PTSD. Everyday recruiters go to inner cities and ask for
falling tears, raindrops from your eyes. Falling rain, let it fall.
I never let my children volunteer for the military to make the same mistakes as I did these days could be deadly. If they're drafted with dodging, my go back stay ready. I support Manning and Snowden. You know where this country's heading. Global tyrant, hegemonic, bully police force, demonic practice, virgin sacrifice, bloodlust. Oil wars valuing corporations over people. Vampires. This is sick worship for objects and pure evil. Material desires get more attention than spiritual. Benefits are based on profits, complaints aren't given view. Arms manufacture, supply both sides of conflicts to you. Have a problem with any of these statements or doubt their truth? I'm a father and a veteran, and I stand for peace. Julian Assange against our commanders-in-chief. But it's hard to be better when daily demands compete. I'm not ignoring the slaughter, I'm just trying to eat like you.
Falling tears, raindrops from your eyes. Falling rain, let it fall.
Volunteers. Yo, thank you everybody for joining us today. Peace and love, peace and harmony. Welcome to this February 10th edition of Stand Down Live 2021. My name is Miles Megasyfe. I'm joined by my lovely hosts, Natasha and Mike.
What's up?
What's up, y'all? So we are going to change up our format a little bit. And I just want to announce that for everybody in the audience. Thank you for tuning in today. For those of you who don't know why we started this show to honor the national uprising and international uprising for Black and indigenous lives, which started earlier last year and caught international fire after the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. Two separate cities, two separate times, and kind of came to news at the same time, and the country caught fire. And so we called on active duty and active duty military to stand down if they were to get called into a peaceful protest of people asking for their rights. Here we are in 2020, and we see the effects of a failed insurrection by the far right, and so today we're going to have a conversation about COINTELPRO and why that's coming to the fore. I think before that, we'll introduce ourselves a little bit for people at home. Do y'all want to do that?
Yeah, sure. I'll go first. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here today. Wednesday, February 10th. My name is Mike James. I was in the Navy. I was a mass communications specialist. Beforehand, I was, a struggling artist, photographer, videographer. And so I went to the recruiter and I said, if you can make me a photographer, I'll join the Navy. And they did. And they gave me a contract for that. And so I ended up going and being a professional military propagandist. And I was good at it. I succeeded at it. And to a certain extent, I enjoyed it. And I ended up being deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. And I ended up seeing the real material conditions on the ground there. And I started to have some real questions about what being in the military really meant and what it meant for me and what we were doing there. And I saw, I made a lot of very serious, important friendships with local Iraqis and Afghan people who really touched me. Some of the most important, endearing friendships I'll ever have in my life. And that really changed me. And I started to question. And a few years after getting out of the military, I started to really understand that anti-imperialism is the way to be. I decided I didn't want to be wrong about anything, that serious ever again in my life. And I went through some serious soul searching and a lot of studying and reading. And here I am today, still developing, still studying and reading. And this show is part of my own personal development. I have the responsibility to be correct and to provide the correct analysis. And it also gives me the opportunity to kind of, chop it up with good friends and like-minded people. It can help me sort out the things that I got wrong and the things that I got right. And it's important part of my development. So I'm really lucky and happy to be here today. And that's my story. Miss Natasha.
And Mike, that was real. Hey, y'all. Let's see. It's been a journey. So my name, of course, is Natasha. I'm a native of the South Side of Chicago. Halfway through my senior year of high school, I raised my hand and said an oath that I truly didn't understand what I was saying and what I was committing myself to. So I originally, I come from a poor family. And so my thought was I'll enlist in the Air Force and at least do the 4 years and come on back and, have the benefits of the 4 years. Somehow that 4 turned into 20. Along those 20 years, it was a lot, particularly the last 8 years. the last, I would say 15 years. So, you know, you go in, I went in the mid to late 90s, during, you know, very different times than we currently see. And so it was a lot to unpack after my 20 years of like what I had participated in. So I'm one of those who, you know, was a go-getter, was very good at my job. You know, awards and all of the accolades that we kind of brag about in the military, I have it. And that promoted me to places and assignments that were unique, right? And so I spent the last 5 years of my career at the headquarters Air Force Special Operations Command. And it was there that I really started to understand the implications of what I was really truly participating in. It was also a time that Trayvon Martin was murdered, Mike Brown Jr. was murdered, and being in the Panhandle of Florida, which was known as Lower Alabama, it was the first time that I had really saw like, you know, military folks participating in extremist white supremacy racism. And so those last 5 years shaped me. It was more than just the combat stress and the moral injury that I have in participating in that. It was also the surgical racism that I had experienced while at AFSOC, which is a predominantly white male environment, as the same with all Special Operations Command or Special Ops across the military branches. So again, after that 20 years, I began I would say it began to hit me, like the 20 years of deploying and the trips and those special assignments and all these things that I looked at as special. And the more I became, I won't say politicized, but the more that I became smarter on the world that I wanted to like see, I had to unpack those 20 years. And because of that, it led me to Veterans for Peace, right? And so for all of those who are on active duty, who are seeing the things that are that's happening right now, particularly January 6th, what you may have seen in the summer of 2020, all of what you might be questioning when you put on those combat boots, you are not you are justified in your questioning of things, particularly when you see active duty folks, veterans, police officers, and feds participating in the insurrection, and you see the connection of the acute racism that goes unchecked in the military. You're not surprised, as was I was not, because I had seen these people talk and do a lot of this before then. So, you know, my story in the military is really a typical one. Most folks leave home for a better opportunity. I saw a whole bunch of stuff that I want to talk about. I want to edify people about. I want young people to know, particularly those that look like me, being a Black woman, and bold, right? And being able to have a consciousness about the things that just didn't feel right. So I want to talk about these things. This show has been helpful. It's also uncomfortable to talk about all that, you know. So, you know, one of the things that I'm excited about as we talk through things, not just here on the show when we're live, but like how to continue to process that in a healthy way. So for all of those who join us, whether you're a member, considering being a member, I'm glad y'all here with us. Let's talk about COINTELPRO. Or Miles, no, your introduction, please.
Yes, I am. I am live on the air right now, my loves, and let me. And the Redneck Riviera is where I am. Like, I love my home. I love where I am. I love America. I love the Panhandle. I love the South. I love this strip of Midwest America I used to live in. I joined the military because I moved down here to the South after being raised in New York and my grades plummeting. And um, my grades plummeted because of structural racism. I was immediately taken, basically lost a bunch of credits. So I went into my junior year almost like a sophomore, like a beginning sophomore. And from the beginning, I had to make up and just never got ahead. Maybe it's excuses. Who knows? It's useless. I'm in a place where I was told I was nothing for 3 months and broken apart and fed in pieces into a system that I knew nothing about. I was 18 years old. I had just graduated high school. I was 135 pounds. I was 5 foot 10 inches tall. Um, and uh, in those 3 months on Paris Island, I grew to the man I am now, 6'3", 195 pounds. In those 3 months, I was introduced to colorism in a way that I had never thought I was going to experience. And um, I came out very angry. Um, and then I served 4 years of excellence as a Marine. Um, and after 3 years, 8 months, 6 days, and 10 hours, I was sent home with an other than honorable discharge. So I guess 3.5 years I was exemplary until I failed a piss test. And then I was cut and let go for smoking weed, which I was introduced to in the Marine Corps. So when I went home to Atlanta, which wasn't really my home, because I was moved there when I was 16 years old. I only had 2 years in Atlanta before I went to the Marine Corps. When I came back to Atlanta, I wasn't really accepted because it was never my home in the first place. And I didn't fit in. And I had so much anger and hostility that I didn't want to fit in. And I identify a lot with the people who attacked the Capitol on the 6th of January. They are left alone by a country that didn't care about them in the first place, that used them to fight unnecessary wars, to feed a system that wasn't caring for the people back home. So it took me 18 years after I got out of the military to speak about it. And it took me having a son and being at home and raising that son, because my wife was at work making more money than I had been making at my job after 4 years of working there full time and having a master's degree in nonprofit management. My wife's first year in residency she earned double what I made as a full-time social worker. So the equation was simple for me to leave work. Raising my son brought out a lot of suppressed PTS, which led me to Veterans for Peace after writing an album. And here we are now on Stand Down Live in 2020, another 6 years after writing Civil I Am, still hearing about multiple people of color, multiple people, poor people, but all you hear about on the news is people of color. I never hear about white people being shot by the cops, even though they're also shot by police officers. And nobody should be shot by police officers because they should be protecting us and serving us. They really shouldn't carry guns. And so we're here on Stand Down Live asking people to wake up and asking people to get active and trying to get ourselves active and educated. And we're going to talk about COINTELPRO today, how it's affecting our world today, why it started, why the FBI started it, used it on its own people to suppress movements of liberation by Black people and Indigenous people, stolen Africans and pillaged natives. We know that this land is stolen land. The Stand Down Live show is for veterans. We have resources at Veterans for Peace, at aboutface.org, at other organizations. We can put them in the link right now for people who are questioning their service, for people who want to get out honorably, who feel like they were misled by their country, or by the system, or by politicians who have been misguided by lobbyists. So we are here to share progressive information with you, and we will have resources in the chat. There are resources in the link. We're going to get into the who, what, why, when of COINTELPRO. Not really the where too much today. I guess we'll be covering Chicago. We'll be talking about Fred Hampton. We won't be going to the West Coast today. And we love you. We thank you for joining us. We thank you for being here with us on February 10th, 2021. I got a fun fact I got a couple of fun facts for today about in Black History Month, Black Future Month, Black Presence Month. I'll share the link for you. On February 10th, 1927, Leontyne Price became an internationally acclaimed opera singer. She was born in Laurel, Mississippi. I should say Leontyne Price was born in, I don't know if Leontyne Price was a woman or not. I believe so. On February 10th, 1964, after 12 days of debate and voting on 125 amendments, the U.S. House of Representatives passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 by a vote of 290 to 130. 12 days of debate and voting. On February 10th, 1966, economist Andrew Brimmer is appointed to the Federal Reserve Board, dealing with our money. Let me give you that link in the chat. And that's a few facts for you about in Black history.
I love it. One thing that I want to add before we go on, Miles, is really, this notion that Black history is this one thing that should be celebrated and talked about for 28 or 29 days out of a year. When we were talking about just planning our shows, we were talking about how the reality is Black history is really American history. You would be hard pressed, between, now and dating back to the 1600s and even before, right? To find a piece of or American history that doesn't include the accomplishments, the sweat equity, the labor, the ingenuity, the creativity, right? Just the presence of Black peoples, and American descendants of slaves, of chattel slavery. And so I think this notion that this is something that we do and observe, I think that's, a cute bow on it. But really, we're talking about American history. So I'm looking forward to our talk today as we kick off the month in a strong way.
I appreciate that, Miss Natasha, and I appreciate the rhyme too. So I want to, for people who don't know what COINTELPRO is, I'm a product of hip hop, and so I feel like I know what COINTELPRO is. J. Edgar Hoover and the Black Panther Party, and for people who know but don't know, I'm going to give you a very good introduction to what COINTELPRO was, why it was started. This excellent article written by Branko Marcetic, The FBI's Secret War, in this month's edition of Jacobin, which is a resource that we will put into the chat. I'm going to read the first couple of sections, because it really, for people who don't know, this is education. And so here we go. I couldn't say it better myself, so I want to read it, and we're going to share the resource. The idea that a tyrannical government is secretly plotting against U.S. citizens is a popular and long-standing belief among much of the American far right. The scenario has many variations, But the basics are that politicians threatened by a potentially rebellious populace are watching and listening in on them, working to undermine them, and readying for the day they will wrench away their freedoms. But this scenario isn't merely a paranoid fantasy dreamed up in the deepest corners of the alt-right. It's relatively recent history. Instead of gun-toting sovereign citizens and Confederate flag-waving patriot groups serving as the targets, however, the US government largely targeted segments of the left for widespread surveillance, disruption, neutralization, and eventually destruction. This was the COINTELPRO program, whose first operations were launched by the FBI 60 years ago this month. COINTELPRO, short for Counterintelligence Program, was the name given to a series of programs initiated by the Bureau between 1956 and 1971, aimed at undermining and eradicating groups, movements, and individuals, almost all of which were part of the left. It viewed as threats to national security and social order, like the left as the only focus. That's my own edit. I apologize. By the time the FBI formally shut down the program, it had successfully torn apart many of these left-wing groups and movements. In the process, the Bureau destroyed the reputations and, in some cases, lives of many. The history of COINTELPRO shows how far a nominally democratic government can go to shut down leftist movements they view as threatening, and what kind of pushback we might expect in response to a movement upsurge in the 21st century. Origins and hysteria. COINTELPRO had its origins. So I can stop there for people who didn't know, or people who think they knew what COINTELPRO was and why it was started. We can stop there and come back to it perhaps, because I think it'll be more lively if we share in that manner. The article goes in depth about all the different organizations, the breadth of the organizations which COINTELPRO went into destroying, and how it did it. And we're at a time today when people know what is afoot. That's why we're talking about this. So the 1971 Freedom of Information Act has linked arguably J. Edgar Hoover's link to the assassination of Fred Hampton, and the groundbreaking movie Judas and the Black Messiah by Shaka King is coming out this Friday. And so the three of us are going to have a watch party and talk about it. And we want to do that with you as well. So we're introducing the conversation today, and we want to go back and forth with you and chop it up and build. So that's where it is. And I will pass the mic.
Natasha, do you have anything off the top of your head to add to that?
I do. I mean, when to hear Miles talk about the areas, so often what we hear about is this real surface level conversation of what COINTELPRO was, and I'll argue is still today and probably on 4.0. But I think about, a lot of times as a mom, I'm thinking about that I've had to educate my daughter on Black history, and not just as Black history, but as American history. Like her dad and I have shared that task as parents, because we noticed that the curriculum has been whitewashed, right? Sanitized in order to, I would just argue, avoid ownership and responsibility of the treatment of Black peoples, particularly the descendants of enslaved people here in America. But I did not know until I started reading as a full adult in my 30s, is when I found out that COINTELPRO was deliberate in their way of intimidating teachers and progressive curriculum. And so it's not a mistake that we have versions of history that is not accurate, right? This is deliberate from our own government. And again, it's just, as you talk about the different departments and ways in which COINTELPRO continues to kind of move our society, it's what our children are taught in school. So then, January 6th is not an anomaly, right? Like this, we don't, no one, the truth is not widely told. And so that is really where this is really an ugly history that is probably, again, much worse or ingrained in what we see. Listen, we know one of the extremist group, I can't remember if it was the Boogaloo Boy or Proud Boy, one of their leaders perhaps had some connections to the feds. And so this isn't, and again, this isn't new. It's been going on since, what'd you say, Miles, the 50s at least, and and sharpened in the 60s and 70s. And so I think this is a moment of Sankofa where we really have to understand where we are now by understanding history a little bit. So I'm glad we're having this conversation, and man, so much to say. Mike, what say you?
Yeah, so you mentioned the Proud Boys, and the guy, his name was Enrique Terrio. So he was the leader of the Proud Boys, and it turned out that he was a prolific informer and collaborator with law enforcement, with federal agents. So I mean, it really highlights the fact that basically, it goes back hundreds of years. It goes back to the beginnings of settler colonialism, and the functions of a colonial state is to protect the interests of the ruling class. And what we see over and over again throughout history is that these white supremacist right-wing groups have always been an integral part of the police state and federal intelligence agencies. And so nobody should be really surprised by the fact that the Proud Boys are federal agent collaborators. Yeah, but there was a couple things, bullet points that we really wanted to kind of touch on and nail down. First of all, in pop culture, the release of this new movie about Fred Hampton called Judas and the Black Messiah. It is an exciting movie. I'm glad it's been made. I know it's very controversial. You go into, there's a lot to be said about it. But I think by and large, it is good that it has been made, and we really hope that it encourages people to begin to understand the roots and the goals and the mission of the Black Panther Party, which, by and large was an above ground organization that was focused on building consensus and providing services to the people, to the masses, regardless of race, regardless of who you are, who you were. What they wanted to do is they wanted to serve the people, and they wanted to wake them up to the fact that we live in a white supremacist, settler, colonial, imperialist society built on genocide and hate. Here we are in the heart, the imperial core, and we all play a role in that. We all are a part of it, and we benefit from it. So I think what the Panthers were trying to do is wake us up to that. So that movie is coming out, and at the same time, there's a significant news break that a Freedom of Information request that was filed something like over a decade ago or many years ago, some information was finally released. So going back into the history of how we found out about COINTELPRO, Miles obviously already covered this in the Jacobin article, but briefly in 1971, a group of people who identified as the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI. It was just a group of people that saw the flagrant corruption of the FBI in their hometown in Pennsylvania. And they knew that something was going on. They knew that there was information. They knew there was paperwork somewhere that would talk about how the FBI was participating in assassinations, and in the case of like the Move family, arson and bombings. They dropped a bomb on a family. I think that was later in the 70s. But I mean, it just shows that they were corrupt. People knew it. And so this Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI happened in 1971. They broke into an FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania, and found an incredible amount of information that was just disgusting and obviously corrupt. And they mailed it off to several news agencies. And much of that information was released. 13 years of litigation. Finally, it took in 1983, after 13 years of litigation, it seemed as if the historical record was complete and the true narrative of the raid established. Chicago police officers, under the command of Cook County state's attorneys and at the behest of the FBI and its COINTELPRO program, targeted Black Panther Party leader Fred Hampton and assassinated him while he lay asleep as part of a murderous pre-dawn raid, during which the police fired more than 90 shots that also killed Panther Mark Clark and several other survivors badly wounded. And that record stood. I know I'm taking up a lot of time. I'm going to wrap this real quick and pass it back to you. I'm sorry. And so that record stood until December 4th, 2020, 51 years after the raid, when historian and writer Aaron Leonard received from the FBI a redacted copy of Mitchell's personal file in the response to his 2015 Freedom of Information Act request. So, and basically when he got that, it revealed that Hoover knew about it. He even knew about the small payments. They were paying Fred Hampton's childhood best friend. They were giving him $200, $300 rewards to inform on him that ultimately resulted in 90 shots being fired into his home and then being assassinated in his own bed. So the president is just participating in this petty bullshit of, trying to assassinate people who are essentially just trying to serve their community and start, health and food programs and kindergarten programs for kids. And that's the world we live in. So let's see, how can I make this productive and pass it back to y'all? Like,
I'll jump in and say that it's not okay. You got it.
Well, my question is, how do we see this reflected now? We're still living through this. And so, what are your guys' reflections on that, and where do you see it? What's going on here?
Yeah, I see it as not petty. It's the most dangerous thing to this establishment, to this power structure that we live under, or that we're fighting against, that we live in opposition to, or that we live within. And they're terrified. They're terrified of the people realizing their power. So it's, I think they have tried to trivialize it and minimize the intelligence of Black liberators and educators, the Stokely Carmichaels. They have tried to minimize the voice. You know what I'm saying? They've eliminated voices, right? So they haven't only minimized them. They've also instilled fear, and then like through characterization and through caricature, have taken away the power of the voice. The voice is like our so-called leaders are actors and sports players. You know what I'm saying? NBA stars and football players and rappers. And these aren't political leaders. They don't do this in the white community. I know everybody says this, but it's true. It's the absolute truth. I want to if I shared the article, and I don't want to read it word for word, but I really recommend that people get into this article, because the government is terrified of of Black, indigenous, queer liberation, like women's groups, women's organizations, as far ranging as Black theological groups. Like if you're like Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated basically by COINTELPRO, was tracked and bugged and, you know what I'm saying, killed because of COINTELPRO. I mean, it's, and then to Malcolm X, to Fred Hampton, anybody, like the what's the quote, to eradicate the possibility of a Black Messiah rising up, like so then
Yeah, they had to stop it by any means necessary, right?
yeah, so
Yeah.
then that the the seriousness of that is evident. How does it play out in today's society? Everybody knows January 6th had happened with people of a darker hue. The batons would have been out blocks down the road. We wouldn't have gotten up the steps, and certainly not inside. And people wouldn't have been fearing for their lives. And first of all, if we hadn't gone there, people wouldn't have had to fear for their lives, because the uprising and the righteous rebellion, as Miss Natasha coined for me, is so righteous. It's so beautiful and so empowering when people have the strength to stand in silence and for their right, for their freedom of speech. It's a lot more empowering than people getting killed and flag poles being used as weapons on law officers. That's disgusting, and that's sad. And it's just, I can't, I keep saying it's sad, because they're still here. Those 75 million people still have to be addressed and healed and brought in. You know, Miss Natasha.
Yeah, I don't want, like, yes, to what y'all said, and I also don't want to like lose focus that there was a razor sharp focus on Black folks by the FBI. And I found that to be particularly interesting. Like, yes, they also, listened in on women's, tea parties and the socialist movement, to try to, find out whatever type of dissent was happening. When women were sharing thoughts about how to cure, menstrual pain, the FBI had notes on that too. So they were unrelenting in the way that this expansion just, it's dirty. And again, it's not over. And we see that as a result that there's still so much that we don't know about January 6th. There's some actual information that they've withheld from the public, right? So if what we see publicly is bad enough, just know that it is much, much worse. And that, our government, if it has the opportunity to find out what type of, food people ate back in the day, they definitely had the ability to see January 6th coming a mile away. Nevertheless, they were unprepared. So, I have so much on my mind around COINTELPRO, but I really, when I think about just Chicago, just the legacy of Fred Hampton in Chicago, so often it's told around the story, I want to say two things, and I'm going to end pass the mic. Is one of the things about the movie, the criticisms that I'm hearing, and actually resonates with me, is that a lot of Fred Hampton's revolutionary mindset and his politics and his boldness. He was 21 years old and was organizing across gang lines, across color lines, and he was effective, and it hadn't been done before. And not only that, they were feeding children breakfast in the morning. They had sickle cell clinics, or just neighborhood medical clinics to provide adequate care, particularly for Black women who weren't treated fairly in hospitals, right? And so to be able to serve this community in this way, we haven't seen it since Fred. I mean, I won't say to the magnitude um, that I feel his life was cut down, for this vendetta that America has had on Black bodies, particularly those that dissent. So that was one thing that I'm hopeful to watch this movie on Friday, but I go into it wanting so much more. So I'm encouraging people to read his true story. There are some links out there on YouTube where you can hear him in his own voice, because the idea, and we'll see, there might be surprises, is that the movie doesn't truly go there. And then the last point is really around what do we do when we, sometimes we doubt people's experience with like the just law enforcement. So if this is something that we're all agreeing is still happening and that it is decades refined, how dare we also then turn around and like deny people's experience of the weight of this system? And so I'm hopeful that as we have this conversation, we're just not looking at it as with a rear view lens, but that it is actually something that is active and that happens to communities, particularly those that are Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and Hispanic. And so we should really approach people's experience with a lot more compassion and empathy, because we know what we're reading and what we're seeing. So that's why I'm excited we're having this talk, because it's not Black history, it's Black presence, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, we have the receipts. We know what the state is doing to undermine the Black community. What did you have there, Miles? You had something else you wanted to cite, a specific article?
I didn't realize I wasn't muted when I was giving Natasha the snaps, brother. But yeah, I did. The article goes on. So I stopped. There's about a paragraph. There's a couple of paragraphs after Origins in Hysteria that you should get into, and I shared the link in the chat with y'all. He goes on to explain what the FBI was after. The question is asked, what were the threats that bedeviled the FBI during these decades? So why were they spending all this money, right? The Bureau launched successful attacks against racist hate groups like the Ku Klux Klan, though only after President Lyndon Johnson demanded that they do so, and never with the zeal with which it pursued leftists, right? So they spent all this money, but the bulk of its efforts were devoted to disrupting and neutralizing, to use its own parlance, law-abiding groups on the broad left. This meant, firstly, the Communist Party of the USA, the inaugural target of COINTELPRO in 1956. That's really why they started, as well as the Socialist Workers' Party, SWP. It also encompassed the Puerto Rican independence movement, the American Indian movement, and what the Bureau termed militant Black nationalist groups, a misleading rubric under which it placed groups as diverse as the Nation of Islam, the Black Panthers, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or the SCLC, as many people know, and Martin Luther King, and the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE. So that big, wide group, basically all Black people who want anything peaceful or just, are a threat to the country, along with natives, along with feminists, and anybody who's progressive. And so today we still have these people in positions of power in police departments around the country, in positions of local government, and of course national government, Senate, Congress, Supreme Court, local federal courts. It's the list goes on and on. And these when you ask how does structural racism affect you, or you're an individual, why are you complaining about structural racism? Well, stop and frisk doesn't happen in my community, you know, because I live in an affluent white community, but I didn't always live in an affluent white community, and I was often stopped and frisked when I was young and just out of the military. And so I see my students when I was before COVID, when I was going to schools and teaching students, I see my students being harassed by police and telling stories of being harassed for the past 11 years now. I've been, you know, going to school since 2010, and since then I've heard stories of young people being harassed from in the north and in the south. And so it affects us because these young people have criminal records before they're even out of high school. They have negative perceptions of the law, or of the role of the law, the rule of law, the idea of the rule of law. It's all a sham. It's like, it's, you know, you grow people, you have people, and they see it. You know, people are very aware. So you see, you know, young people without see very clearly that they don't have and other people do. And then people, the people who have, they don't see it because everything's about them. So it's easy to turn that off and not pay attention. So disenfranchised voices fighting for their space and not being heard has been the narrative. You know, it has been, and or that voice being stolen, like, you know, when you have the power, being bought out, allowing your voice to be bought out, or your movement to be bought out, is a threat and a fear and a constant danger in our world, because you have to eat and you have to survive. And so you have to put these threads together, and then you have these infiltrators and you have the Judas, you know. So this is going to be a very interesting movie. I really look forward to watching this with y'all. You know, and we're at a time now where like Tekashi 6ix9ine is like the thing, and it can be debated whether you can never be a gangster, really never be a rapper, and then take on a persona of a gangster and a rapper and put them together and put that out, and people accept it, and it's really violent rap and misogynistic and hateful and materialistic, and it makes the world go crazy, the music world, and doesn't do anything for our world as a whole. And the system supports it. The system supports it. And he's a young person of color. And then you have young people of color doing very powerful music, which is questioning things. And maybe they have been drug dealers or they have been hustlers, but they are rappers, and the system doesn't support it. And so you see it play out all through society. And I'm really looking forward to this movie. And Jay King is a young person of color in Brooklyn, and I'm just really looking forward to his take on it, and how it comes together, and how the story. How I love stories, so I want to see if it tells a true one and plays a game for Hollywood, or if it breaks all the rules and says it how it is. I can't wait.
Word. Yeah, there's a lot of threads there I wanna add to. I'll try and make it brief though, and I think I can bring it full circle in it briefly. You know, you talk about hip hop and pop music, and what we saw in the 90s specifically was a lot of like gangster rap became very popular. And we know that the FBI and the CIA played a huge role in that, because we have the cocaine from Colombia that was brought in by the FBI. and turned into crack. And Reagan knew about that. He played a role in it. They knew that they were undermining poor communities, specifically Black communities, and they knew and at the same time they were dismantling welfare and job programs, and they were building prisons. Like it was designed to shatter Black liberation movements across the country and across the world. And so we see that reflected up until this very day with figures like Tekashi 6ix9ine that are just lost souls, that are just, they don't know that they've been manipulated. They're these, that they've been created by this monstrous, this Frankenstein doctor, right? And to bring it full circle to this Judas and the Black Messiah movie that just came out. It's going to be a good movie. I'm going to sit and I'm going to watch it with an open mind, and I'm going to learn everything I can from it. But I found an interesting article about it where a hip hop artist from Chicago named No Name, her name is No Name, and she's a great artist. I've watched a whole bunch of her videos over the last week trying to get my my thumb on what her perspective is. And there's an article here that says she turned down a spot on the Black Messiah soundtrack because she watched the movie, and quote on her Twitter, she says, No Name, she says, "I hope people actually go study Fred Hampton's analysis on U.S. imperialism and fascism beyond just seeing a movie. Most of his politics were stripped from that film." So I think from the reviews that I've seen is that what they do is they really focus. I can't remember the name of the informant of Fred Hampton's friend that was working with the FBI right now, but the movie really focuses on him, and obviously not on the Black Panthers' politics, which are rooted in communism and anti-imperialism. So so that kind of brings it full circle, like this woke young rapper who understands politics, who has a great political perspective, actually turned down a spot on this blockbuster movie. So it goes to show that this COINTEL program that started as far back as we'll say it goes back to World War II or whatever. It goes back further than that, obviously. It's installed in everything. You can't even make a movie about Fred Hampton without diluting the political message in it and focusing on like interpersonal relationships and that kind of thing. So yeah, I know, Miss Natasha, I know you had something cooking you wanted to add.
No, just a final thought, and it's really to add on, to what you just said, Mike, is even in the way the movie is packaged in the trailers, it gives this both sides is responsible for the assassination of Fred Hampton, right? A 21-year-old young man sleeping in the bed with his pregnant fiance, right? And so just that alone, and No Name is one of the quick pieces that I read that just made sense to me. And then it made sense when I read, or it made sense because all of the other critiques that I have been hearing is this isn't truly a story of the man, Fred Hampton. It is literally, like as it's intended. So hopefully there will be more biopics. But in the meantime, there's a lot of ways to learn, his true story. Because if you talk to folks, his son is here in Chicago, Chairman Fred Hampton Jr. He's the chairman of the Black Panther Cubs. They're active here. And his mother is still living and still with us, right? And so, but there's also people who organized back then. Some folks who talk about cooking breakfasts between their college classes, because that was their role. Like those people are still here, in their late 60s. So I think it's important that we not just really look at this as things that's of the past, that we can actually bring, really see that there really is a current to what is happening in our government. And as our country is actually about to, or is actually holding, what is it, an impeachment trial. Um, it just really does, ring true when you look at the intelligence of America to know that it is razor sharp on white folks. But here in this moment, it wants to just, kind of move on. So I think this is all relevant to what we're talking about in current events. And this was a good show. This is a good chat. I'm glad we had it. I know that we're going to continue next week. We're inviting people to watch that movie with us on Friday. Come back next week, Wednesday. We're going to dissect it and have a reflection. And we hope that you all will share with us in the comments. Over to you, Miles.
I just looked up his name. William O'Neill was the informant, the FBI informant, and yeah, they humanize him in the movie as a way to say, yeah, both sides played a part. How are we inviting people to watch this? We're not actually inviting you to watch it with us, but we're inviting you to watch it. I think you can get it on HBO Max. Is that correct? Is
Yeah.
that the only place?
It's saying HBO Max. So if you have an HBO Max account, it's at no additional charge. And then
this
it
is
says in
Judas.
theater. So wherever theaters are open, not in Chicago, but wherever theaters are open, you could take a chance to go see it in person.
Ooh. That would be Judas and the Black Messiah. Judas and the Black Messiah. Yeah, I wouldn't go to a theater. But who am I to judge? Maybe there's only 5 people in your town. So bless your heart. Go to your theater. Keep it open, because small businesses need support. They certainly didn't get it from number 45. We thank you for being here with us today. I love this format, y'all. And leave us some love in the chat. Tell us what you think of today's conversation, and we look forward to growing it next week with you, and growing with you next week as well. Thank you. Peace and love.